The Employee Retention Credit from the IRS is the last major COVID relief program. Claim up to $26,000 for each employee you had on payroll. This is Marty Stewart with Disaster Loan Advisors. The IRS tax refund is newfound money for your business. Let us help you navigate the ERC program with flexible options and working together. You can relax and have peace of mind that you're in good hands. Stay safe, stay compliant, and keep more of your refund. Take the next step and schedule a free ERC consultation call with us today.
7 ways to determine qualified wages for the Employee Retention Credit. Here are the top 7 ways to determine qualified wages for the Employee Retention Credit. 1. What wages qualify for the Employee Retention Credit? Employers can get a refundable payroll tax credit of up to $26,000 per W-2 employee through the Employee Retention Credit, ERC. The ERC, which is available under the CARES Act to businesses affected by COVID-19, has proven to be a lifeline for numerous businesses around the USA. Currently, many employers are either unaware of the ERC or assume they do not qualify. 7 ways to determine qualified wages for the Employee Retention Credit. Here are the top 7 ways to determine qualified wages for the Employee Retention Credit. 1. What wages qualify for the Employee Retention Credit? Employers can get a refundable payroll tax credit of up to $26,000 per W-2 employee through the Employee Retention Credit, ERC. The ERC, which is available under the CARES Act to businesses affected by COVID-19, has proven to be a lifeline for numerous businesses around the USA. Currently, many employers are either unaware of the ERC or assume they do not qualify since they have taken the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, which is a widespread fallacy. This is totally false. You may still be eligible for the ERC if you receive the maximum credit of PPP from Social Security, but you will not be able to double dip on those wages when figuring the ERC. The number of employees on the payroll of an eligible company as well as a recovery startup business determines the definition of qualifying wages and qualified health plan expenses. This way to determine qualified wages came from disasterloanadvisors.com's What Wages Qualify for the Employee Retention Credit. 2. What are qualified wages? Qualified wages are wages, as defined in Section 3121A of the Internal Revenue Code, the Code, and compensation, as defined in Section 3231E of the Code, both determined without regard to the contribution and benefit base, as determined under Section 230 of the Social Security Act, paid by an eligible employer to some or all of its employees after March 12, 2020, and before January 1, 2021. Qualified wages include the eligible employer's qualified health plan expenses that are properly allocable to the wages. The specific circumstances in which wage payments by an eligible employer will be considered qualified wages depend, in part, on the average number of full-time employees it employed during 2019. For an eligible employer that averaged more than 100 full-time employees in 2019, qualified wages are the wages paid to an employee for time that the employee is not providing services due to either one a full or partial suspension of the employer's business operations by a governmental order, or to the business experiencing a significant decline in gross receipts. For an eligible employer that averaged 100 or fewer full-time employees in 2019, qualified wages are the wages paid to any employee during any period in the calendar quarter in which the business operations are fully or partially suspended due to a governmental order, or any calendar quarter the business is experiencing a significant decline in gross receipts. IRS.gov's COVID-19 related employee retention credits. Determining qualified wages. FAQs shared this way to determine qualified wages. 3. Qualified wages for the Employee Retention Credit. The definition of qualified wages depends on how many employees an eligible employer has. If an employer averaged more than 100 full-time employees during 2019, qualified wages are generally those wages, including certain health care costs, up to $10,000 per employee, paid to employees not providing services because operations were suspended or due to the decline in gross receipts. These employers can only count wages up to the amount the employee would have paid for working an equivalent duration during the 30 days immediately preceding the period of economic hardship. If an employer averaged 100 or fewer full-time employees during 2019, qualified wages are those wages, including health care costs, up to $10,000 per employee, paid to any employee during the period operations were suspended or the period of the decline in gross receipts, regardless of whether or not its employees are providing services. IRS.gov's Employee Retention Credit shared this way to determine qualified wages. 4. What wages qualify when calculating the retention credit? In general, wages, compensation that are subject to FICA taxes, as well as qualified health expenses, qualify when calculating the Employee Retention Credit. These must have been paid after March 12, 2020 and qualify for the credit if paid through DEC 31/2021. Remember, the credit can only be taken on wages that are not forgiven or expected to be forgiven under PPP or used for any other types of credits that are determined using wages. Qualified health expenses generally include the employer and employee per tax portion and not any after-tax amounts. Also, when determining the qualified wages that can be included, an employer must first identify the number of full-time employees. For the purposes of the Employee Retention Credit, a full-time employee is defined as one that in any calendar month in 2019 worked at least 30 hours per week or 130 hours in a month and is based on the employer shared responsibility provision in the ECA. What do you need to know about the Employee Retention Credit from UC.edu, shared this way to determine qualified wages? 5. Qualified wages. The number of full-time employees you averaged in 2019 determined which employees you could claim for the credit. Depending on the year, for 2020, if you averaged more than 100 full-time employees, only wages for those you retained who are not working could be claimed. If you had 100 or fewer workers, you could claim wages for all employees whether or not they are working. For 2021, the threshold was raised to 500 full-time employees, meaning that if you employed more than 500 people, you could only claim the ERC for those who are not providing services. If you have 500 or fewer employees, you could claim the ERC for all of them, working or not. Investopedia.com's The End of the Employee Retention Credit. How employers should proceed, shared this way to determine qualified wages for the ERC. 6. What wages qualify? Compensation and wages paid by a company to full-time employees during the relevant quarter are known as qualified wages. These wages include any health plan expenses incurred by the employer that are correctly allocated to the wages. So, for ERC in 2021, the credit stands at 70% of eligible wages or qualified wages up to a quarterly cap of $10,000 or a max of $7,000 for every employee each quarter for the remainder of 2021. Thus, an employee may claim up to $7,000 each quarter or up to $28,000 in 2021. This way to determine qualified wages for ERC came from RecognizeApp.com's Employee Retention Credit Calculation. How to calculate. 7. Calculation of the credit. The amount of the credit is 50% of the qualifying wages paid up to $10,000 in total. It is effective for wages paid after March 13th and before December 31st, 2020. The definition of qualifying wages varies by whether an employer had, on average, more or less than 100 employees in 2019. Less than 100. If the employer had 100 or fewer employees on average in 2019, then the...
As you can see, navigating the Employee Retention Credit Program is very complex and confusing to try to figure it out on your own. Even on the IRS ERC FAQ pages, it says, this page is not current. There have been several years of updates and changes to this IRS tax credit already, including 4 congressional acts and 5 updated guidances from the IRS, totaling over 3,900 pages. Who has time to sift through all that information, let alone decipher some of the confusing language and rulings? In order to stay compliant with current IRS ERC rules and regulations, expert specialized help is highly recommended. Even if your business received an SBA PPP loan, you are still eligible for the ERC credit. If you think you may not qualify, it's worth a conversation to see if your business does. Let us assist you with a complete employee retention credit process, or if you might be stuck on filling out the IRS 941X forms correctly on your own. We are here to help. Stay safe, stay compliant, keep more of your refund. Email us at support@disasterloanadvisors.com or call us toll-free at 877-463-9777 extension 3. Or visit us on the web at www.disasterloanadvisors.com/ERC for complete details on the Employee Retention Credit Program for your business.